Hello everyone, in today's video, I'll show you how to create this delicious ham and cheese croissant in Procreate. We'll paint together and I'll guide you by sharing my favorite techniques to bring this croissant to life. Whether you're just starting out your artistic journey or an advanced skilled artist, these tips will help you take your work to the next level. So take a moment to cozy up, pour yourself a drink, and let's get started. All the brushes and the canvases I'm using will be found in the description below. You can also download the free sketch and the color palettes there as well. For today's demonstration, I'll be using the Rough Groove Texture canvas, but you could use any canvas you like. And as you can see, I have my sketch here underneath the watercolor texture canvas effect. And we're going to create a new layer and we're going to drag it down underneath the sketch. This will allow the sketch to be more visible while we are painting. And as you can see, I have the color palettes here in order for you to follow along. So let's start with using the light tan brown color. So we'll put lighter tones, mid-tones, and darker tones as we progress to the top of the croissant, and then the cheese and the ham. So make sure we have that layer selected. And start with the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity and the size at 100% for both of them. And start from the top, making our way down to the right side. So starting from the top, we'll make our way around just like this. Using 3 tone colors of the brown gives a nice, rich, buttery realism of this croissant. And make sure we're going to paint the same tone color underneath the cheese and the ham. So just follow along, understanding there's a difference between the cheese and the ham and the bread. If you find these tutorials helpful, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, you'll be notified when new videos are released. And also the bottom pieces of this croissant. And make sure we're going to paint the same tone color underneath the cheese and the ham. So just follow along, understanding there's a difference between the cheese and the ham and the bread. And once we're done with the light tones, we're going to start using the golden brown mid-tone. So create a new layer and pick this tone color. And now we'll put another layer on top of the light tone that we made. Just like this. And don't forget the bottom layer as well, underneath the light tone textures. Now create a new layer and add the dark brown tone color now. Working on the top layer of the croissant. A quick tip I recommend people to do is to follow along the edge and fill in the areas in the inside. This will allow you to be a bit more accurate and cleaner look. And do the same thing, follow along the lines at the bottom piece. And we're going to make some harder, darker edges on the right side as the light is reflecting from the top left. And before we move on to painting the ham and the cheese, we're going to combine the 3 layers of the tones that we made using our 2 fingers and pinch them together just like this. And once we combine, we can now blend in the colors together using the moving blender. Keeping the size to around 30%. And start with blending the 2 tone colors. So light to mid, and then mid to dark. We're going to go over the layers again to give a nice blend of the light tones and the dark tones together. And we're going to reduce the size to around 12% because of the smaller area at the bottom piece here. Now we're going to work on the ham. So we're going to pick this light tone pink salmon color. Using the wet on dry brush, and we're going to create a new layer. And one of the main benefits with working multiple layers when you have to add a certain object is that we can easily remove that part or even change the tone colors later on if we don't like it or want to change the aspect of the painting. And as you can see, the top part is the cheese melting on top of the ham. And the bottom piece of the cheese is going to be the ham part with a little bit of curvature look. The folding parts together like this. There's a little bit of a corner at the bottom here. And then the second layer at the bottom on the right side. And pick this darker tone of the pink, and we're going to create some more depth, painting underneath the cheese, just like this, and inside the loop around like this. This will create more depth, giving that perfect illusion that there's going to be folding of the ham. I was inspired to create this ham and cheese croissant after ordering it from a local cafe. And I highly recommend if you ever feel stuck or hit with a wall creativity, maybe going outside, grabbing a coffee, sitting by a window, or in my case, ordering your favorite dish. Because creativity doesn't always show up when in demand. And sometimes you need a little bit of inspiration from the outside world. So if you need an excuse to go grab your favorite latte, this is your sign. So just continue adding the midtones on the bottom of the cheese here and looping around the right side like this. And open the layers tab and combine the two layers, and we're going to use it. And once we combine, we can now blend in the colors together using the moving blender. To blend in the two-tone colors, keeping the size to around 20% using the moving blender. Just mix in the two-tone colors just like this. Now we're going to move on to the cheese part. Pick this yellow tone color. So we're going to create a new layer and use the wet on dry brush, and starting from the left, we'll mark our way around the cheese like this. And we're going to work our way around the croissant at the bottom piece like this. If you are struggling to see the light and the dark tones, here's a little trick that might feel a little bit silly but works wonders, and it's squinting. When you have a reference, you want to soften the world by blurring out the small little details. This will allow you to focus on the bigger picture, the values, the tones, and the light and darks. This will give you the overall structure of the lighting and the shadows. Sometimes we're so caught up in the tiny small details, but we often forget to look at the big picture. So next time you feel overwhelmed, try squinting a little. Step back, soften your focus, and trust the details will work itself out. And now we're going to create a new layer and pick the second tone color, a little bit slightly darker of the cheese tone that we painted before. And we're going to paint underneath the croissant bread, just like this. Now once we're done this, we're going to combine the two layers and use the moving blender again and blend in the two tone colors around 15 to 12%, just like this. Now we're going to focus on painting the smaller details of the ham. So we're going to create a new layer on top of the ham tone color that we created and pick this darker tone of the ham and use the fine line brush, keeping the opacity to around 65% and size to around 35%. And we're going to zoom in and loop around these corners to give a more depth look. Naturally, the edges of the ham are going to be a bit darker tone. And just follow along the corners as they loop around. And now we're going to use the regular blender, keeping the size to around 20%, and we're going to drag in some of the tone colors towards the inside of the ham, like this. Creates a depth without doing too much. And the gradual change of colors like this, by pulling in the colors. Now go back to the main croissant that we made and create a new layer on top of that. And we're going to pick this dark brown tone color. Use the wet on dry brush, keeping the opacity to around 50% and size at 100%. And as you can see, I've sketched these corners as it folds in towards the center, and that's where we're going to paint over. This will create a nice hard edge watercolor effect, while at the same time creating some folds, giving that nice flaky effect of the croissant. And we're going to do the same thing to the bottom piece of the croissant. And we can reduce the opacity to around 30% even more, create another second tone layer to give a nice flaky effect. And now we're going to create a new layer again, and we're going to pick the fine line brush, keeping the opacity to around 20%, and we're going to create smaller lines going upwards with a little bit curvature look, giving a nice flaky look. Of course, we can spend hours chasing the photorealism look, creating every shadow, small details. But with this piece, we're trying to create a simple, fun, minimalistic look. So whenever you're painting something, your main objective is to find features that stand out to you that will recreate the style look. For me, when I was looking at the croissant, I can see the small wrinkles that I could add with a simplistic look like this. And of course, if you want the actual image, you could just take a photo of the croissant itself. But you're trying to create an art for yourself that represents who you are. So be creative. Find out what works for you and what looks good for you, and ignore what the audience may think. Now create a new layer and add the dark brown tone color now. And now we're going to use the hard edge brush, enhance look of the croissant at the bottom to separate from the cheese and the bread. And going in an upward direction as we create the lines a bit thicker and darker. I was actually too focused on the details on the layering, blending process that I totally missed the corner on the top. I always recommend zooming out, looking at the bigger picture of your work. So I used the wet on dry brush again to fill in the top left corner with a darker tone of the brown, as it's showing underneath the croissant. Now, we are now using the wet on dry brush. We're going to use the same tone color that we used for the darker tone color and continue making darker pigment flakes coming inwards from the outside corners of the croissant, focusing on the areas where I made the sketches to enhance that look of the folds. Now we're going to create a new layer and add a glistening effect by picking the white tone color to create this shine. It's subtle, but it will bring the croissant to life. And we're going to use the gouache brush this time, keeping the size to around 25% and opacity around 30%. So just going along the lines at the top and working with the grooves just like this, enhancing the look of the folds and the flakes. Now we're going to increase the opacity to 100% and creating some shine on the cheese like this, on the corners like this. All the way around, focusing on the edges. reduce the opacity to around 50%, creating some of the shine on the ham as well. Now we can go to the Layers tab and remove the sketch by checking off the box. And now we're going to go back to the most bottom layer, click on that layer, create a new layer, and we're going to drag it underneath the croissant tone that we made. And now we're going to pick this dark blue tone color and use the wet on dry brush, and keeping the opacity around 35% and size to around 40%. And since the light's coming from the left, we're going to cast a nice shadow on the right like this, starting from the corner of the cheese, creating a slight loop as the croissant protrudes slightly, just like this. And then we can put another layer to enhance the darkness of the inside of the croissant. And there you have it, a simple ham and cheese croissant made in Procreate with a watercolor style. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you want to continue painting with me with other tutorials, click on the next video and I'll see you there.